Good evening. Thanks for joining Gail and me for tonight's Undergraduate Research Symposium. It's always a thrill to celebrate the work of some of our outstanding graduating seniors who have engaged in original research in partnership with and through the support of our amazing faculty. Celebrating your research accomplishments is particularly meaningful to me as I think back to when I was a student at Dartmouth 40 years ago. It was then that Professors Bob Norman, Jim Baumgartner, and Joanne Hutchinson in the math department convinced me that I, as a student, had the power to make new discoveries. I credit my own undergraduate research experience for giving me the motivation and the confidence to enter a PhD program in mathematics at Caltech immediately after graduating from Dartmouth. But today is all about you, our students who have worked so hard to advance your own understanding and create new knowledge to share with the world. I'm so proud of all that you've accomplished, and I'm especially proud of the adaptability and fortitude that you've shown in completing your honors thesis work through all of the turmoil and changes brought about by COVID-19. Despite being thrown a curveball unlike any other, you didn't let it stop you from achieving your goals. And I know I speak for all of the family, friends, faculty, and staff members joining us today in saying that we're excited to honor your research accomplishments. In a typical year, Gail and I host a series of dinners at the President's House, where graduating seniors who are writing an honors thesis are invited to enjoy dinner, share their work, and hear about the research other students have done in departments all across campus. But due to COVID, we've changed the format a bit and are hosting these symposiums virtually so that we can still have the opportunity to hear about all of our students' exceptional work. So let's get to it. Stephen, would you lead us off, please?
Sure, thank you. And I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to present my thesis. So my thesis, Unity and Plurality, in search of the ideal community through likenesses of the Trinity in Dante's Paradiso. Dante's Divine Comedy is one of the foundational literary works of Western culture, and many of its concerns remain pertinent to our world today. Provoked by a personal crisis at the outset of the poem, Dante Pilgrim, protagonist of the poem, embarks upon a journey through the afterlife in search of self-knowledge and a community in which he might play an active part. At the end of this experience, the pilgrim witnesses a vision of the Trinity, the three singular but intrinsically linked figures of the one Christian God, that momentarily provides him with a powerful sense of the possibility of a fully realized life. Throughout the poem, Dante Poet, author of the comedy, anticipates this final vision through several specific categories of inquiry. The first of these is desire. The failures of Dante Pilgrim as a citizen in a politically fragmented Italy, as a love poet who suffers unrequited love for his muse Beatrice, and as a sinner, propels his journey through the three realms of the poem: Inferno, shown here on the left, Purgatorio in the middle, and Paradiso up above. Dante Poet conceives of desire as composed of two distinct parts, emotional and intellectual. These two distinct but equally important components of desire mirror the harmonious relationship between the three distinct but equal persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So too, the pilgrim's emotional desire for Beatrice and his intellectual desire for God work, for the most part, harmoniously towards the same end, an ongoing perfecting of his own unique identity in relationship with the triune God. Desire also compels Dante Pilgrim in his search for an ideal human community based on order, love, and concord. In doing so, he learns of the critical role of multiplicity for the consolidation of a united community. The ideal relations between citizens unite them in a single community, but also, in affirming their differences, allow for the perfecting of distinct individuals. Unity does not mean uniformity in absorption, but rather, as in the example of the Trinity, a harmonious working together of equal but distinct persons. Essential to the proper functioning of community is its primary means of communication, language. Dante poet chose to write in the vernacular because vernaculars are living languages of evolving communities, rather than fixed, artificial, ancient languages such as Latin. In his use of the vernacular, Dante employs a variety of Italian dialects, and in doing so, he affirms through this multilingualism the legitimacy of multiplicity that in his Christian vision sees its perfection in the plural form of the Trinity. Language then is also the medium through which knowledge is conveyed. A further trace of the Trinitarian reflection of multiplicity and unity, Dante situates various medieval thinkers in the Cantos of the Sun in Paradisos 10 to 14, each of them equidistant from the truth, and all of them necessary in forming that circle of truth. Here, Dante poet takes two renowned figures from two entirely distinct religious traditions, St. Francis and St. Dominic, and he assigns the attributes of the one to the other, thereby equalizing their differences and imitating the Trinitarian ideal of distinct but equal persons. In the final scene of the poem, at the end of Paradiso 33, Dante poet represents to Dante Pilgrim a complex vision of the Trinity. Ariel Seiber argues that the three interconnected circles of the vision are arranged as either a 3-3 torus link, shown on the left, or the Borromean rings, shown on the right. I find the Borromean rings particularly compelling because they capture the 3-in-1, all or nothing nature of the Trinity. The rings are united by virtue of their relation to each other, since no one of them is connected directly to the other. And each of the distinct rings is equally necessary for the harmonious working of the whole structure. And just as with the Borromean rings, each distinct part of the human community is necessary for the unity of the whole. And it is only in this communal relationship that one's individuality can be fully realized. Thank you.
That was really great. Thank you so much. So I have a question. What do you think in our multicultural world, how can the Trinitarian poetics of Dante speak today to the heterogeneous reality that he could never have imagined?
Thank you. That's a great question. So something I briefly touched upon was one of the most compelling features of the Divine Comedy is its enduring relevance to humanity today. And though Dante lived in a much different historical context, a lot of the concerns and themes that he deals with are very pertinent to humanity. And so the Divine Comedy is a journey of self-becoming and seeking a better version of oneself precisely in a better version of society. And so while Dante takes a Christian approach to this, it's certainly not limited to a religious context. Dante's journey speaks to the universal human feature of our fallibility and our frailty. And so this process of growth, of seeking self-knowledge and identifying what's wrong and what's not working and trying to figure out how to improve, whatever crises you're going through and make your best version of yourself. That applies to all humans, regardless of whether you're a Christian like Dante. It's a perspective of thinking about oneself in relation to the rest of society. And Dante obviously grounds this in a very Christian medieval context, but it's not limited to that context.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Cecilia, why don't you go next?
Thank you. I will just pull up my slides. Good evening, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present. My name is Cecilia Morin, and I am presenting my honors thesis that I am writing for the Department of Anthropology. My thesis advisors are Professor Elizabeth Carpenter-Song and Professor Chelsea Kipland. The title of my thesis is The Meandering Roads of Care, Narratives of Mental Health Providers in Central Maine in the COVID-19 Milieu. My research uses an anthropological lens to examine community mental health care services in Central Maine during the pandemic. As defined by the National Council for Behavioral Health, community mental health encapsulates the various forms of mental health care that follow deinstitutionalization in the United States. The community mental health providers with whom I work are not psychiatric providers. Additionally, they primarily engage with low-income populations with severe and persistent mental illness. Providers rely upon the in-person component of care to reach clients whose life histories may challenge the capacities to establish trust and rapport. The pandemic incites providers to grapple with compromising the in-person component of care through remote services. Furthermore, clients may face obstacles such as lacking internet access and/or electronic devices for participating in telehealth. My primary motivation for engaging in this research derives from my family's experiences seeking mental health care services for my younger brother in our Maine hometown. My positionality as a sibling caregiver and a Mainer plays an integral role in my research. My work seeks to show how the culture of community mental health in Central Maine prioritizes constructive care while grappling with the social distancing and telehealth obstacles inherent in the COVID-19 milieu. The literature on community mental health, recovery, rural mental health, and care provide critical frames for my research with providers in Central Maine. I link my thesis with broader scholarship in psychological anthropology, including the work of scholars such as Paul Brodwin, Professor Elizabeth Carpenter-Song, Sue Estroff, Janice Jenkins, and Neely Lorenzo Myers. My research question and ethnographic setting of interest emerged from the pandemic, as did my research methods. After the Committee for the Protection of Human Subjects at Dartmouth College approved my study application in late June 2020, I reached out to organizations that deliver mental health services in Central Maine. Stakeholders at organizations helped me recruit participants. Given the social distancing guidelines and Dartmouth's research limitations associated with COVID-19, I invited participants to meet with me via a phone call or a video call. During the summer and early fall of 2020, I met with 10 mental health providers for initial and follow-up interviews. At the end of the fall, I invited providers to meet with me for a third time. I spoke with 6 of the providers in the winter. Because I promised participants that I would not associate their identifying information with their responses, I utilized pseudonyms for organizations and for individuals. Following the methods advanced by Virginia Braun and Victoria Clark, Kathy Sharmaz, and Deborah Paget, I embarked on the analysis stage by coding interview transcripts using the Atlas TI Max software and by writing memos on the themes I observed. Throughout my research, I found that rurality and isolation inform how providers envision their professional orientation toward caring for clients. I examined how providers use telehealth to describe their pre-pandemic ideals of mental health care and how remote services differ from in-person interactions. I learned that the pandemic invites and/or urges providers to express their personal and professional mindsets toward their work. My research showed me how providers and clients grapple with following public health guidelines that can limit mental health care engagement. Overall, this research investigates the action of caring in desolate social and geographic landscapes. And here are my references for the presentation. Though I lack the time in this presentation for providing an exhaustive list of acknowledgements, I would like to formally thank the providers and organizations whose time and energy made this thesis possible. I would also like to thank my thesis advisors, the Department of Anthropology, the Dartmouth Committee for the Protection of Human Subjects, and my parents for supporting me throughout the process of this thesis. Finally, thank you all for providing me with the opportunity to present this work.
Cecilia, thank you. That was terrific. And I have a question about how this research actually changed you. So how have your research experiences conducting this project informed your perspectives on advocacy? And how do you think that's going to relate to your future plans?
My experiences working on this research really informed my perspective on advocacy by showing me the provider point of view. In the past, I had always been an advocate for my brother on the caregiver side, but I had never understood the extent to which providers' professions revolve around advocacy. I'm so grateful to the involved providers for helping me learn more about their perspectives. And in addition, working on this research helped me solidify my decision to pursue a career in law so that I can gain the tools that I need to help fight for mental health equity.
Great. Thank you so much. And best of luck in your future plans.
Thank you very much.
Amina, why don't you go next?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Alrighty. Hi, everyone. My name is Amina Razak, and my senior honors thesis is titled The Rupturing of Another Pathology, COVID-19, in the Experiences of Muslim American Women. My primary advisor is Professor Patricia Lopez in the Geography Department. So the overarching argument of my thesis is that Muslim American women are not equally understood and that they are in fact an invisibilized demographic in the US, especially pertaining to the policies and research within a COVID-19 context. Though COVID-19 has been devastating for everyone and especially affected Black and brown bodies more vigorously, it has also led to a distinct set of challenges and adaptations specific to Muslim American women. My thesis depicts the ruptures and culturally specific ways in which COVID-19 has impacted women through veiling religious practices, motherhood, community, and forms of healing and grieving. In this culminating project, I interviewed 6 women, 3 from the Upper Valley and 3 from Dallas, Texas. The names on this slide are their pseudonyms. I chose these 2 distinct locations because COVID-19 has had varying effects in these separate regions, especially as there is a really different Muslim population in Texas versus in the Upper Valley. Governmental policies also drastically differ within Texas from the Upper Valley. So besides engaging in feminist digital ethnography, I also pulled in autoethnography, visual methodologies, and primary source archival research that I completed in London and Belfast, Ireland. As a student with a special major of my own making, I am drawing from a vast and diverging array of scholarship, from social and cultural anthropology to critical feminist geographies and more obscure literature such as Arab feminism scholarship, Muslim feminist scholarship, and literature on Islamic theology and rulings. So the argument in my first thematic chapter is that due to the rupture that is COVID-19, in all forms of social reproduction, lost community and bonds of kinship have led to increased loneliness and negative mental health, as well as an increase in unpaid care labor. Options for food are directly tied to one's class and socioeconomic status, as well as geography, as the women in the Upper Valley report more open space and more options for healthier organic produce. The shift in Ramadan, which is the holy month of fasting that we also find ourselves in right now, has also affected the women in Dallas more severely as they had intimate community ties pre-COVID and several mosques and physical spaces to express their faith, whereas the Upper Valley does not. In my second thematic chapter, I argue that though Muslim American women have found creative and innovative ways to adjust their hijab and niqab style to fit with the face mask, they must still negotiate color, style, material, and ways of wearing to present themselves as safe individuals in an Islamophobic US where veiling is pathologized. I argue that veiling is an extension of one's physical body and that within the US, personhood is equated to outward appearance, thus demonizing the veil as it covers more of an individual's personhood. Finally, in my third chapter, I argue that Islamic funeral practices and grieving have changed due to COVID-19, especially as within Islam, if someone has passed away due to COVID-19, they are considered a martyr. I also argue that Western biomedicine has damaging maternal care and mental health experiences, especially for Muslim American women. And within this chapter, I call for culturally and religiously competent and specific care. I also argue that the ability to no longer grieve as a community has led to negative mental health and a prolonging of the grieving process for Muslim American women. Therefore, my thesis serves primarily as a decolonial project to bring forward the stories of Muslim American women in a highly individualized fashion. Thank you so much, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions now.
Great, thanks, Amina. That was really very intriguing. So you studied women in the Upper Valley and in Texas. You talked a little bit about the differences. Why do you think, other than what you already explained, what more can explain these differences, and what did you find most surprising?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, like I mentioned before, the Upper Valley actually does not have any kind of central mosque. Dartmouth College, usually the prayer room is the hub where the broader Upper Valley Muslim community comes to pray. So it's really intricately tied to Dartmouth College. Whereas Dallas, Texas is, honestly, it has a lot of Islamic scholarship going on. It has a variety of mosques present. The Muslim community itself is so large. Another factor is that in the Upper Valley, no woman wears a niqab, whereas in Dallas, Texas, there's a good community, a pretty growing community of women that wear the niqab, which also covers their mouth and their face. So I think that this different kind of community has directly led to different kinds of effects due to COVID-19. Like I mentioned, there is a more apparent sense of loss and community and kinship in Dallas, Texas and Upper Valley. And I also think that in terms of geography, the socioeconomic class of the women that I got to interview in the Upper Valley was really different from those in Dallas, Texas, who often did not have health insurance or, were from a lower socioeconomic status. So I think all of that really compounded the various ways that they were affected by COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Good, thank you.
So I think we'll go next to Themis.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Themis, and my senior thesis in computer science is about finding complex patterns in data streams. Today, I will talk to you about some motivation of this work first, before getting a bit technical. So there are two main areas in computer science and statistics that my thesis touches upon. The first thing is called network analysis, and on your right, you see a very large network, like, for example, Google or Facebook or Twitter. And network analysis is all about spotting specific patterns in networks that have a particular significance and could explain particular phenomena in, for example, human relationships or in the animal kingdom. A good example that I found for network analysis is the identification of central actors in the spreading of disease, which is particularly relevant in the pandemic we are going through right now. And a study done by two scientists at Harvard in 2009 found that a very simple way to find central actors in the spreading of disease in a college campus, for instance, like ours, is to get a random sample of a bunch of people and then monitor their friends. This is an example of what's called the friendship paradox, that says that typically one's friends have on average more friends than they do, which means that they are more central to the spreading of disease. And by using techniques in network analysis, we can come up with results like these that are easy and explain valuable things. The second area in computer science that my thesis focuses on is called data streams. So as we dive into this digital age, the amount of data that computers have to process is huge. And we have to figure out the important information by just using very little memory, because simply we don't have enough memory to store everything in a single computer. So my thesis dealt with algorithms that use very little memory to infer network analysis statistics. The problem in mathematical terms has to do with something called hypergraphs. So a hypergraph is basically a network in which two components are not connected by a single relationship, but we can connect multiple components by a single relationship, as shown in the figure to the left. What my thesis concerns is counting patterns in these kinds of hypergraphs. For example, what do I mean by patterns? You can see on the figure on the right various patterns that one might be interested in counting. One pattern is a circle, the other pattern is a wheel. Specific relationships between entities that might show us things about a network. So my thesis came up, I came up with an algorithm for counting simplices, which is a fancy word for basically a pattern that looks like a tetrahedron, like you see in the bottom of the screen. And so if we have a very big network that's piped to a computer as a stream, and we don't have enough memory to store the network in memory, then we would like a low memory algorithm to count these tetrahedrons for us in the stream. So first thing that I did was come up with an algorithm to count these. And the second thing is I answered the question of, or I guess I tried to, is there a better algorithm that can do this? Is there something better than the algorithm that I came up with? And the answer was negative. By using a few mathematical techniques, I managed to reasonably prove that there is no algorithm that can solve this problem using less memory. And of course, there's a lot of details flying through the cracks, but essentially, these were the two main contributions of my thesis. Yes, thank you.
Great, Demis, I love that. I could understand it. It was great. So tell me, what knowledge and skills did you need in order to conduct this research that didn't come from the courses you took, either your math or CS courses? And so how did you acquire this knowledge, these knowledge and skills that you needed?
Right. So proving the lower bound result that I talked about earlier, proving that no better algorithm exists than the one proposed in my thesis, involved using a mathematical field called communication complexity that concerns how, it studies how fast and how efficiently can two computers or people communicate with each other. And I didn't take any classes to study that field, but I was given the opportunity to be exposed to it by doing research with my advisor during my junior year. So that line of work really helped me develop these results in my thesis.
Great, good, thanks. So it was the close connection between students and faculty that we feel so deeply about here at Dartmouth. So that was great. Arun, do you want to go next?
Awesome, sounds great. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to present to you. I will be presenting on my senior thesis in economics, and specifically, I'll be going over whether community-driven development makes a difference in the development process. So what is community-driven development? It's a form of aid, and it specifically aims to encourage inclusive development. CDD assumes that the poor have greater capacity than many assume that they have, and they have the most to gain from the development process. And as such, this form of development seeks to actively involve the poor and their institutions by providing them with resources and decision-making power. Community-driven development has become very prominent in recent times. So as of 2019, the World Bank alone was spending $21.6 billion on 219 different community-driven development programs. And my motivation going into this study was trying to see whether this form of aid was effective and whether it could reap strong economic outcomes. And another motivation was the mixed effects that previous studies had uncovered. So some studies have found that several programs really benefited different communities, while other studies found disappointing results in terms of economic outcomes and poverty reduction over the course of a program. And so I specifically chose to look at the Kauai CIDSS program. It was the largest development program, community-driven development program ever conducted in the Philippines. So it was started around 2003, and it involved over 4,000 villages in around 200 municipalities all across the Philippines. The first phase cost $182 million, so this was a major program, and the average municipality received $150,000, which equated to about 15% of their annual budget. So this was really a significant amount of aid that participating municipalities received. And the program had three different goals. The first was to reduce poverty. The second was to improve local governance. And finally, the program wanted to improve social capital. So the focus of my study was on this first goal of whether the program could effectively reduce poverty over the longer term. So to conduct my study, I looked at 12 different outcomes of interest. And so I specifically looked at poverty reduction as one of my main outcomes, and also looked at several different measures of economic well-being. And so these include things like access to electricity, access to piped water, like the literacy rate, different things that can measure the economic well-being. And I did so over a span of 15 years. And I was able to use two different empirical approaches. One was called a regression discontinuity design, and the second was called a differences in differences design. And I was able to exploit the fact that this program delivered aid to municipalities below the 25th percentile income threshold within a given province. So for the regression discontinuity design, for instance, I was able to compare provinces right around the threshold. So say comparing provinces at the 24th percentile of income versus those in the 26th percentile, which were unable to receive aid, and really see like whether there were differences in outcomes across the longer term. So based on my regressions from the two approaches, I found through my main approach that there was not a significant and consistent effect of program eligibility on these different economic outcomes. However, it is interesting to note that in my differences in differences models, I found that the program did result in modest improvements in economic well-being. And so these different findings across my two different main model specifications is likely driven by outlier municipalities, in that the most poor municipalities reaped enormous gains through the program, but this effect was not so clear right around the threshold of program eligibility. And so based on my thesis, I determined that the program did not significantly impact economic well-being over the longer term, but I do want to note that the program may have yielded non-economic effects. And so specifically, some previous research has found that the program was beneficial in reducing civil conflict, as well as improving political accountability. And I think one takeaway from my research is that program designers must carefully plan community-driven development initiatives so that these programs can be as effective as possible. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Arun. That was very enlightening. Why do you think the impacts are so small on long-term poverty? And did you find any positive impacts?
Yeah, so in terms of why I didn't see these impacts, it's not entirely clear, but my best guess is that it's related to project implementation. So it's important that the programs are designed well and that they're implemented well so that programs can reap gains. And there was a wide heterogeneity in terms of the projects that got funding. So for instance, one of the positive effects that I did find across some specifications was that literacy significantly improved. For that might indicate that building schools, for instance, is a more productive investment than, say, some of the other investments that occurred throughout the program. And I guess one other positive impact was the impact on the most poor municipalities across my model. So while it's not necessarily at the, might not be for the median municipality, it might have an impact on the particularly poor municipalities.
Okay, great, thanks. So Leah, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I am, thank you. All right, everyone. Hi, I'm Leah Casey, and my thesis is in the English department, and it's called A Creaturely Intervention. It details a strain of what I call affirmative creatureliness, both within and ideally beyond the Canterbury Tales. Creatureliness is often defined as an abject and animalistic indicator of createdness. Affirmative creatureliness, on the other hand, seeks out an active and creative creatureliness, which, while created, also creates. In this way, my project seeks to redefine creatureliness itself, declining the term affirmatively rather than negatively. The question that orients this thesis is whether creatureliness can be more than an abject category of exposure to the fluxes of power, as is commonly conceived in scholarly accounts. From my own experiences of how creatureliness affected me, it seems to be a category which ruptures one's experience of reading. Creatureliness forces one to be attuned to a different state of humanity, an account from below rather than above, a rupturing experience which defamiliarizes reality and calls attention to a fleshly human realm. Accordingly, the creatureliness that I track in this thesis is a dissonant force which calls attention to the trenches of pain which sovereign harmonies exclude. And by sovereign, I mean any perspective indebted to that of the ruler or ruling class. I track a creatureliness which, while proximate to the animal, is drawn into the ambit of an ungovernable animality which refutes power's claim over those bodies within its hold. Affirmative creatureliness looks at the backs on which history has been built, rather than the sweeping rhetorical techniques foregrounding history's fated and inevitable arc. I chose to take this version of affirmative creatureliness forward into a thesis concerning affirmative creatureliness in the Canterbury Tales, because I believe we need to go back to the formation of societal ideologies in order to reframe them. Understanding points of origin allows us to reframe creatureliness as more than abject animality. The Canterbury Tales are of interest in relation to three figures, Hippolyta and Emily of the Knight's Tale and Alison, the wife of Bath. Emily, for instance, is described in the text as a creature, and Alison is called a creature by critics. Lee Patterson calls Alison a creature of the male imagination, and Robert Jordan calls her a creature of her creator. In my first chapter, called Sovereign Decomposition, I explore how the creaturely influences of the Knight's Tale both reveal and enact an imminent strain of decomposition within power. While the Knight of the Knight's Tale strives to make history's progression seem fated and inevitable, relying upon the ideological stance that history's arc is righteous simply because it culminates in the present, creatureliness is always at work unfixing that dangerous stance. In the tale's creaturely interventions, such as the weeping women who intervene in and quite literally seize Theseus's procession. Power is revealed to be unable to account for creaturely suffering or interpret creaturely desire. As such, creaturely influences break open power's hold from the inside. The second chapter, called Creaturely Recomposition, picks up where the first left off, with the decomposed ruins of sovereign power. I argue that the wife of Bath, Alison, recomposes an alternate creaturely community from the ruins of sovereignty. In so doing, she banishes the logic of sovereignty, which enjoins readers to conserve and protect the self, instead composing an alternate creaturely community based on a renunciation of sovereign power. Alison uses a politics of desire to situate mutual pleasure as a viable political schema. Alison rewrites power's narrative. She even tears out 3 of its pages. By being attuned to the bodies which too often are built upon as power's abject foundation, Alison centralizes the fleshly realm of creatureliness as an affirmative and hopeful political stance. Positing an affirmative creatureliness allows for a more compassionate look at the way in which those most subject to power are not merely subaltern subjects. This thesis strives to be faithful to the affirmative humanity that creatureliness brings to light. Thank you, congratulations to everyone here, and looking forward to the Q&A.
Leah, thank you. And I think you explained this, but I'm going to ask again. How does the category of creature differ from that of human or animal or just character?
So creatureliness is a category of humanity primarily, and this means that it's often described in abject terms. We've heard sort of in literary terms, you poor creature, you disgusting creature, you beautiful creature. So in that way, it's declined both affirmatively and negatively. It's sort of a way of positing someone as really above average or really below average. So in this way, it has this dual quality where it's very positive and very negative, but it also has a unifying twist where in sort of biblical or religious terms, it's all of God's creatures. So how do we sort of take a stance that can flesh out what creatureliness means today and how declining the term affirmatively allows us to find a more positive way of seeing sort of rhetorical techniques and ideologies which use creatureliness as a method of dehumanizing folks as a sort of less viable scheme. And that's what my project seeks to do by having this sort of idea of affirmative creatureliness. I look at ways in which we can break open those unjust ideologies and those unjust histories, which are prevalent in modern societies, much as literary techniques.
Great. Thank you, Leah. Thanks to everyone. That was great. I think not just the depth of what you're looking at, but the incredible breadth if you go across all of your presentations. I think one of the reasons I am so passionate about undergraduate research is because it's amongst the most powerful experiential learning opportunities we provide on our campus. It's a way for students to exercise and hone the very skills that a liberal arts education seeks to cultivate. It involves asking the right questions, working independently and as part of a team, being resilient and resourceful in the face of setbacks, making connections, building relationships, and learning how to draw meaningful conclusions and communicate those conclusions effectively. I can't think of a better or more timeless set of intellectual skills to instill in our graduates, particularly at this moment in time. So once again, I'd like to thank all of our faculty advisors who have mentored and supported these students in their work, everyone in attendance tonight for your energy and enthusiasm for undergraduate research, and to any students with us tonight who have not yet taken advantage of the incredible research opportunities afforded you at Dartmouth, I hope you feel inspired to take that leap. We are holding our final symposium on Wednesday, May 12th at 5:30 p.m. with an equally inspiring group of seniors who are eager to share their work. So if any of you would like to join us, please do. The link can be found on the Dartmouth events calendar, and we hope to see you all there. So thank you again for joining. Congratulations to the 6 participants tonight, and best wishes to all. Thank you.